The first time I met Gloria Everfield, she was standing in front of my garage with a clipboard, a frown deep enough to crack concrete, and a voice that could peel paint. "You can't run a business out of your home, Mr. Halden," she said, adjusting her oversized sunglasses like she was about to write me a citation for breathing too loud. "I'm Archer Halden, 39, mechanic by trade and the guy who fixes what dealerships mess up." I had just moved into Oak Ridge Heights, a neighborhood that looked peaceful until you met the HOA, or more specifically, the queen of complaints herself, Gloria. I'd spent 6 months converting my garage into a tidy, soundproofed workspace. No oil spills, no traffic, no noise. Just me, tools, and the occasional customer who needed an honest job done without a dealership markup. But Gloria didn't care about that. This violates HOA bylaw 6.3, no commercial activity on residential lots. It's not up for discussion. "It's not a storefront," I said calmly. "I'm just fixing cars for folks in the neighborhood, quietly. I even upgraded the exhaust fan so it doesn't smell like a garage in here." She tapped her pen on the clipboard like it was a gavel. "Doesn't matter. You didn't submit the request for approval, and if you did, it would be denied. We have standards here." I looked around the street. Half the lawns were browning and someone still had Christmas lights up in July. "Standards my rear." "I'll submit the paperwork," I said, already knowing how that would go. I did. It was denied in under 48 hours, signed by Gloria herself, and stamped with a smug little HOA logo. That was 3 months ago. I kept my head down, did the odd repair job for close friends on the down low, and racked up 3 bogus citations from the HOA, one for excessive garage activity, another for non-permanent signage, a magnet on my truck, and one for suspicious guests. Yeah. Neighbors getting their brakes fixed apparently counted as suspicious. Then one Saturday morning, I was elbow deep in the engine bay of a neighbor's Prius when I heard the unmistakable voice again. "Mr. Halden, I need your help." I turned, wiping grease off my hands. Gloria was standing there, red-faced and panicked, clutching her purse like it was a life jacket. "My car won't start. It's my Lexus. The dealership said I'd need to tow it all the way downtown and I don't have time for that. Could you possibly take a look?" I leaned against the hood of the Prius, arms crossed. "You mean help you with my unapproved HOA violating home business?" She blinked. Well, this is different. It's an emergency." I could have laughed, but I didn't, not yet. I didn't move. The Prius behind me still had its hood open, the tools were scattered across a blanket I laid down to protect the driveway, and the sun was starting to bake the pavement. Gloria stood there, clutching her leather handbag like it owed her money, watching to see if I'd jump at the chance to help her. Her silence stretched. "I'm in a rush," she finally said, her voice lower, less sharp. "I have a board meeting at the Civic Center in 2 hours and not my board," I said, walking back toward the Prius. "And not my problem." She followed me, heels clicking unevenly on the concrete. "Archer. Look, I know we haven't agreed on everything, but let's be reasonable. I wouldn't come to you if it wasn't urgent." I picked up a socket wrench without looking at her. "Didn't you say I couldn't do any mechanical work here?" "That was before I realized how inconvenient the dealership is," she muttered. I let that hang in the air. She shifted uncomfortably. "I'll make it worth your time." I turned slowly, narrowing my eyes. "You offering to pay me for an unlicensed, non-compliant, rule-breaking service?" Her jaw tensed. "I'm offering a one-time exception, discretionary authority. It's in the bylaws." "You mean the same ones you used to fine me for a magnetic sign?" She didn't respond. I studied her, then finally reached for a rag and wiped my hands. "Where's the car?" She exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for a week. "It's around the corner. I couldn't get it up the driveway." I followed her to a silver Lexus parked halfway on the curb, hazard lights blinking. She fumbled with the key fob, popped the hood, and stepped back like it might explode. I tried to start it 3 times. It just clicks. I glanced under the hood. Battery cables looked loose. I gave one a gentle twist with my fingers and it shifted, barely connected. You had this serviced recently? She nodded. 2 weeks ago, oil change, tire rotation, and something with the electronics. They forgot to torque the terminals. It's an easy fix. I tightened the connection with a wrench from my back pocket. Try it now. She slid into the driver's seat, turned the key, and the engine roared to life. Her whole posture sagged with relief. I don't believe it, she said. You're better than those dealership clowns. I closed the hood and didn't reply. She got out and reached into her purse. How much? I crossed my arms. You can't pay me. That would violate the bylaws. Her mouth opened, then closed. You're enjoying this, aren't you? I'm just following the rules. She looked down at the pavement, then up at me. Look, Archer, I may have overreacted. Maybe I was too strict. But I have to enforce the rules consistently. That's my job. No, I said. Your job is to represent the interests of the community, not enforce your personal preferences. She blinked. You think this is personal? I tilted my head. You denied my permit in under 2 days. Didn't even ask for clarification. Then fine me for things that aren't even violations under state law. So yeah, it feels personal. She didn't deny it. I walked away. That would have been the end of it, but 2 days later a letter showed up at my door, not from Gloria, from a lawyer. It was a cease and desist. They accused me of operating an illegal business, endangering property values and violating noise ordinances. There was even a threat to place a lien on my home if I didn't comply. I wasn't angry, not yet, but I was curious. So I did what any self-respecting mechanic with a background in logistics and a cousin at City Hall would do. I started digging. First, I requested a copy of the HOA's financial reports. As a homeowner, I was legally entitled to them. Gloria delayed it for a week, claiming administrative backlog. When they finally arrived, they were a mess. Line items were missing, expense categories were vague, and over $15,000 had been paid to a consultant firm with no address listed. Second, I reviewed the HOA's bylaws. Turns out, they were using an outdated version that hadn't been properly ratified by a 2/3 majority, which meant their enforcement actions like my fines were legally questionable. Third, I set up 3 small security cameras around my garage, not for protection, just to document. I kept everything time-stamped and logged, every car, every person, every noise level reading. I even bought a decibel meter. Then I went to the county zoning office and asked a simple question: what constitutes a home business in Oak Ridge County? Turns out, as long as I wasn't displaying signage visible from the street, generating excessive traffic, or creating disruptive noise, I was within my rights. The catch: the HOA could still try to impose stricter rules if they followed state procedures. They hadn't. I compiled everything. Documents, logs, footage. Then I made a few calls. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up 15 minutes early. The room was packed. Gloria sat at the head table, arms folded, flanked by 2 other board members who looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. I waited until the open forum. Then I stood up and handed out copies of my findings. Before you issue another citation, I said, you might want to explain where this $15,000 went. Because according to the bylaws, which, by the way, were never properly ratified, you're not authorized to spend more than $5,000 without a community vote. Murmurs spread. Gloria's face turned pale. And while we're at it, I continued, I've got a letter from the county confirming that my work doesn't violate any zoning or local ordinances. Here's the decibel readings, the traffic logs, and the footage to back it up. One of the board members leaned forward. Is this true? I nodded. I've also filed a formal complaint with the state HOA Oversight Committee. If this board doesn't correct its enforcement process, you could be facing fines or even dissolution. Gloria stood abruptly. This is an ambush. I shook my head. This is accountability. The room went silent. Then someone in the back clapped. Another followed. Within seconds, half the room was applauding. Gloria sat down, her hands trembling. The board voted that night to suspend all enforcement actions pending a full audit of the HOA's finances and procedures. Gloria abstained. But she didn't say a word. The next morning, a different board member knocked on my door, not to serve papers, to ask if I'd consider volunteering for the HOA Reform Committee. I said I'd think about it. Gloria never apologized. But a week later, the fines disappeared from my account. And her Lexus. It was parked 2 blocks away, outside of the HOA boundaries. Guess she didn't want to risk needing my help again. On a brisk Thursday morning, the neighborhood group chat lit up with a strange message. Someone had spotted a moving van outside Gloria Everfield's house. Not the usual delivery truck either. This one had 2 uniformed men hauling boxes that didn't look like furniture. Laptops, filing cabinets, sealed crates. That piqued my interest. I wasn't one to traffic in gossip, but I had a lingering feeling Gloria hadn't just backed off because I caught her in a procedural misstep. Something bigger was unraveling. I'd already filed a report with the state HOA Oversight Committee, but even they had only scratched the surface. Then, 3 days later, I got a call from Officer Penley with the County Fraud Division. Not a social call. Mr. Halden, we received your documentation regarding the Oak Ridge Heights HOA. We'd like to ask a few follow-up questions, if you're available. I met him and a plainclothes investigator named Lindstrom at the municipal building that afternoon. What started as a simple HOA complaint had blown wide open. Turns out that $15,000 I flagged wasn't just a miscategorized expense. It was one of over a dozen payments Gloria had funneled to a shell company registered out of state. The name on the registration, her nephew, 19 years old, no business license, no website. No services rendered. This isn't just a violation of bylaws, Lindstrom said, laying out a spreadsheet across the table. It's felony embezzlement. And she didn't act alone. They showed me a pattern recurring payments labeled as consulting or beautification planning that had no supporting invoices. A handful of those payments were routed through another HOA board member's landscaping company, despite no new landscaping being done in over 6 months. I kept my hands folded. You're telling me this wasn't just a one-woman operation? Penley nodded. We're building a case. But we need more than paper. We need testimony. Someone from the inside. I agreed to help. I'd already earned the board's attention and their suspicion. It wouldn't be hard to dig deeper now that the door was open. That night, I attended the emergency HOA budget review meeting. Attendance was higher than ever. Word had spread that something serious was going on, but Gloria wasn't present. Her seat at the head table was conspicuously empty. Her nameplate was gone. Instead, Mark Davison, one of the quieter board members, had taken over as acting chair. He looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. He cleared his throat. Due to recent developments, the board has decided to suspend all discretionary spending until a full third-party audit is completed. We're cooperating fully with the county's investigation, people murmured. Every homeowner in the room was tense, watching for the next shoe to drop. I raised my hand. Mark nodded. Mr. Halden, I'd like to know who authorized the payment to Everfield Planning Solutions. The record's listed under Community Engagement Consulting, but I've spoken to every block captain on the street. No one ever saw a single report or event. Mark's jaw flexed. We're reviewing that payment. It appears to have been pushed through without a committee vote. Pushed through by who? He didn't answer. That told me enough. After the meeting, I caught up with one of the other board members, a woman named Julia who had always seemed more reluctant than the rest. She was standing near the exit, clutching a leather-bound ledger like it might vanish if she let go. Julia, I said, you've been on the board 3 years, right? She nodded slowly. You ever see any actual deliverables from these so-called consultants? Reports, blueprints, anything? She hesitated, then glanced around. There were supposed to be quarterly strategy packets. Gloria said she had them printed off-site to save costs, but no, I never saw them. Anytime I asked, she said it was confidential until finalized. I tilted my head. And you believed that? She looked down. I did. Until now. That same night, a plain envelope appeared on my porch, no return address. Inside were 4 photocopied pages of what looked like internal HOA emails. The names were redacted, but the timestamps and subject lines were revealing. One caught my eye: reallocate reserve funds, cover shortfall. Another: push through landscaping bid this week, no time for discussion. I handed them over to Lindstrom the next morning. He confirmed they matched the format used by the HOA's board communication system. By the end of the week, subpoenas were issued. Gloria wasn't just under investigation, she was under arrest. County deputies showed up at dawn and escorted her out in handcuffs. Her Lexus never left the driveway. They impounded it as part of asset forfeiture. But the real twist came 2 days later, when the county released a statement naming not only Gloria, but 2 other board members and a former HOA treasurer as co-conspirators in what they were now calling a multi-year financial misappropriation scheme. Over $80,000 had been siphoned from community dues. Some went to fake companies. Some went to personal credit cards masked as equipment rentals. One payment was even traced to a cruise line. Now the neighborhood was in full rebellion mode. A group of residents, led by a local veteran named Gus who'd lived in Oak Ridge Heights for over 20 years, organized a town hall in the community park. No board members showed up, but that didn't stop the crowd. People took turns at a portable mic, venting frustrations. One woman confessed she'd been fined over $500 for a non-compliant mailbox that had been there since 1993. Another man said he'd been denied approval for solar panels 3 times, only to find out Gloria's son-in-law sold traditional HVAC systems. When it was my turn, I didn't talk about the garage, I talked about accountability. This community isn't broken. It was hijacked by people who thought no one would notice. They assumed we wouldn't ask questions, wouldn't verify the numbers, wouldn't demand transparency. But the truth has a way of surfacing, especially when people stop being afraid of clipboards and fine print. Applause echoed across the park. That night, the interim board voted to dissolve the current HOA charter and hold new elections under county supervision. For the first time in 15 years, the community would rebuild its governance from the ground up. The county froze all HOA accounts pending restitution. The crooked board members were banned from holding any fiduciary role in a residential association ever again. Gloria's trial was scheduled for the fall. Meanwhile, my garage, it stayed open, no fines, no threats, no more clipboard visits. The new board passed a revised policy that allowed home-based businesses under clear, reasonable guidelines. I even helped draft it. A month later, I got a letter in the mail. It was handwritten, shaky, and unsigned. But I recognized the script. I was wrong about everything. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I see now I was only protecting myself. Do what you do best. They need people like you. I folded it and tucked it into the back of my shop ledger. Not because I needed validation, but because it reminded me how quickly authority can rot when no one's watching and how fast it can turn when someone finally does. 3 weeks after the town hall, Oak Ridge Heights looked nothing like the place I'd moved into a year ago. The brittle layer of fear that used to hang in the air like humidity was gone. People waved more. A few even dropped off homemade pies as thanks, which I appreciated even if I didn't have much of a sweet tooth. What surprised me most, though, was how quickly the residents got organized once the storm broke. It was like they'd all been waiting for someone to take the first swing at the hornet's nest. The interim board, 5 homeowners with no ties to the previous regime, set up an open forum system. No more secret meetings, no more surprise fines. Gus, the retired Marine, ran security at all the new town hall gatherings. He kept a folding chair near the mic and a pair of mirrored sunglasses that made him look like he was still on patrol in Afghanistan. I was asked to sit on the policy drafting committee. I agreed on one condition. We weren't just going to clean up, we were going to install safeguards so this never happened again. Everyone agreed. That's when the real skeletons came out. The forensic accountant hired by the county released a preliminary report. Gloria had been far more than just greedy, she'd been methodical. Over 5 years, she'd created a network of fabricated vendors, misused a community improvement grant, and even forged digital signatures of former board members who'd moved away. One of them, a widower in his late 70s, was contacted by the county and broke down in tears when he learned his name had been used to approve a fake playground renovation. He hadn't even lived in the state for 2 years. The final tally: over $130,000 misappropriated. That's what led to the second round of arrests. This time, it wasn't just Gloria and her cronies. A contractor who'd been paid for tree removal that never happened was picked up at his office downtown. A third-party accountant, allegedly neutral, was charged with conspiracy after it turned out he'd been dating Gloria's niece and rubber stamping every ledger entry she handed him. The county prosecutor held a press conference outside the courthouse. I stood in the back with Gus, arms crossed, watching the cameras roll. This case underscores the importance of community oversight, the prosecutor said. No one is above the law, not even those who hide behind neighborhood covenants. Gus leaned in without looking at me. You realize you've got half the county looking at you like you're some kind of blue-collar Batman, right? I exhaled through my nose. Let's hope they don't expect a sequel. Back at my garage, things had settled into a rhythm. I'd gotten approval official, stamped, and notarized for limited vehicle repair under the new guidelines. No more citations taped to my door. No more sideways glares from clipboard commandos. Just the occasional neighbor dropping by with a busted alternator or a weird noise in the wheel well. Then, one rainy afternoon, I saw an unfamiliar sedan pull up. Not a Lexus. Not someone from the block. It was an unmarked government vehicle, the kind that didn't belong unless someone was in serious trouble. A woman in a tailored gray jacket stepped out, holding a thin briefcase. She introduced herself as Special Agent Delancey with the State Financial Crimes Bureau. She asked for a few minutes of my time. I led her into the garage, where the smell of motor oil still clung to the air, and offered her the only clean folding chair I had. We've concluded the initial wave of charges, she said, flipping open a file. But there's one more piece. We're trying to confirm something only you might be able to verify. I raised an eyebrow. I thought everything was already laid out. She shook her head. Not quite. We found traces of a secondary account. It was used to launder small transfers under the reporting threshold. Most of them came in monthly, disguised as maintenance reimbursements, but one stood out. She slid a photo across the workbench. It showed a deposit slip, dated 6 months ago. The signature line had been forged, but the handwritten memo read, "Garage settlement, keep quiet." I stared at it for a moment. That's not my handwriting. We didn't think so, she said. But the name on the account was yours. My stomach dropped. You're telling me they opened a bank account in my name? Delancey nodded. We believe Gloria tried to set you up as a fall guy in case things went south. The logic was that if anyone looked too closely at the vendor payments, she could point to you as a rogue business exploiting the system. But she got sloppy. Your signature was traced from a permit application you submitted last year. Unbelievable, I said, jaw tightening. We've already frozen the account and flagged it with the state's fraud database, she said. But we'll need your statement for the formal case file. I gave it, detailed and precise. She thanked me and left. That night, I stood in my garage long after the lights were off, thinking about how close I'd come to being dragged down with the rest of them. The trial started 2 months later. It was held in the county's largest courtroom, with a full jury. Gloria wore a charcoal pantsuit and a look that didn't match the confident woman who once barked at me for having unauthorized magnetic signage. The prosecutor presented a mountain of evidence, including the fake account in my name. When they showed the jury a side-by-side comparison of the signatures, I watched Gloria's lawyer close his eyes like he already knew the outcome. Testimony from residents poured in. People who'd been fined for invisible violations. Others who'd been denied services because they refused to donate to beautification projects. The final blow was delivered by the forensic accountant, who traced wire transfers from the HOA's reserve fund directly into Gloria's personal mortgage account. She was convicted on all counts: embezzlement, fraud, forgery, and criminal conspiracy. The judge sentenced her to 12 years in state prison, with no possibility of parole for the first 7. 2 of her co-conspirators got 5 years each. The rest settled for probation and heavy restitution fines. The community watched every moment. Some came in person. Others followed along via live stream. The day after the sentencing, the new board held a vote to rename the community park. It had been called Everfield Greens. Now it was just Oak Ridge Commons. The HOA was restructured from the ground up. Term limits were installed. Every vote required public record. No more closed-door sessions. No more discretionary spending without dual signature authorization. I helped write the new charter, but I declined a permanent seat on the board. I'd done what I came to do. One morning, I was working on a classic Camaro when a kid from the neighborhood came by, probably no older than 10. He stood near the edge of the garage, holding a paper bag. "My dad says you saved the neighborhood," he said, holding it out. "We made you something." Inside was a small wooden plaque hand-painted. It read, "Halden's garage built on grit." I hung it above the workbench, not because I needed the recognition, but because it reminded me what happens when people stop waiting for permission and start fixing things themselves.